Welcome, everyone, to our daily program on Kabbalah for Heretics. We're currently going through the Zohar as we have been for the past, almost 25 years. Every weekday morning, volume by volume, cover to cover, section by section, page by page, and sentence by sentence. And over the past 20, 25 years, we have completed volumes 1, 2, and 3 and are, as I say every morning, very close to finishing volume 4. I say that for the new listeners. It seems from our statistics that every week we experience an increase in listeners over the week before, and that's very, very promising and uh, very enlightening. So let's get back to volume 4, Vayikra, Leviticus. It's talking about the 4 levels of soul: Nefesh, Ruach, Neshama, Yechida, and then there's above that even the soul of souls. The basic soul that everyone is born with, including animals, is Nefesh, the animal soul. And then man, not animals, but man can climb these levels. So we left off, Rabbi Shimon said, some are gifted with a super soul, neshama, some with the impulse of the spirit, ruach, and some only with an ordinary soul, nefesh. That's the reverse order. So it's nefesh, neshama, nefesh, ruach, and neshama. People don't like to think about that. Oh, the soul is the soul. There are no levels of soul. I have a soul. That's ego. Again, the inability of the ego to accept that there's anything greater or higher or more desirable than which it already is plays out. And of course, that's to the detriment of the individual. He remains at a low level of soul, believing that he is higher than that. Well, think about it. Think of the trouble that gets one in, too. The spiritual trouble, the literal trouble. It's in fact a kind of psychosis in itself. Believing oneself to be what one is not, and grander than one is. That's called illusions of grandeur in psychiatric terms. Many, many, many people are in that position. I venture to say that there are those of us who are listening to this broadcast who, if they're honest with themselves, can find themselves there. Those who attain no higher than the ordinary soul cling to the side of uncleanliness, the left-hand side. They cling to the left-hand side. Again, I want to point out to you that animals share that soul with humans. They both start out at the level of nefesh. And I've said, you'll notice that gets played out when you see a little child, a toddler, and a puppy. They play with each other unconditionally. Neither one is afraid of the other. But as the child gets older, it becomes more frightened by the puppy, a new puppy, and the puppy becomes more wary of the child. They come from the ordinary soul clinging to the side of uncleanliness. And therefore, when they sleep, unclean spirits come and cling to them and show them things in dreams. Now, remember yesterday we talked about this. This is discussing dreams from a very Jungian point of view. When it's talking about spirits, it's talking about the archetypes. And God knows the archetypes can be very negative and very hostile, as well as very positive and very accommodating and helpful. Hence, Gentiles also see true things sometimes in their dreams. Notice it's always saying sometimes. It qualifies it. Everything in a dream is not necessarily true. At one point in the Zohar, it gives a percentage, literally, of that which is true in a dream and that which is untrue. Now, let me look at that for a moment. Let me look at this sometimes with reference to dreams. The Zohar does not unconditionally accept dreams as true. Not all dreams. And indeed, that is itself true. The dream that is untrue is the product of the ego. The product of the ego. It is a dream that one, in effect, makes up after waking up, or entirely reworks out of the ego to make it something other than it was, so that the dream that the person is working with is untrue. The ego has made it untrue. For example, can come and say, I dreamt that I was walking in a strange land and there were many great beings, and all of them, I could feel that all of them loved me and wanted to protect me, etc. Do you see? That's a projection of the ego. And so by doing that, that's a false dream. And by abiding by the false dream, by the ego dream, one is depriving oneself of the true dream and its meaning and its message. The only way around that is to not interpret your dreams by yourself, but to bring them to someone who is a master of the dream. The Zohar calls him a master of the dream. Jung was a master of the dream, and he passed that on directly to his followers. James Kirsch became a master of the dream by his work with Carl Gustav Jung. And that master of the dream, when one to a master of the dream, the master of the dream is hearing it objectively, or hopefully he's hearing it objectively, and that's what makes him of any value. And he can hear when that dream is of the ego or when it is indeed of the soul. And he can hear what the dream is saying more clearly on the side of accuracy than inaccuracy, because his ego, hopefully, the master of the dream to whom one brings one, is not invested in the dream as the dreamer's ego is invested in the dream. This is so hard to take from people, for people. I don't need no goddamn badges. Pardon me. I don't need no goddamn dream interpreters. Yes, you do. If you really want to understand the dream, then you must bring it to the master of the dream, who Baal HaChalom, who indeed is not ego invested in the dream and can stand back and see clearly what it is saying. Now let me point something out. Isn't always true of one who is looked upon as the master of the dream. Even there, it can be that his ego is invested in the dream to the extent that he wants to appear like a wise interpreter of dreams. Do you see? So even there is no guarantee that the interpretation of the dream you're receiving from a third party is any more valid than the interpretation you give it yourself. And that's as true of me as anyone. I spent years under my master, James Kirsch, learning the language of dreams, learning how to interpret dreams objectively, in the exact same way as my mentor, James Kirsch, learned directly from Jung. But that doesn't mean that I'm always accurate. I pray to God that I am. And there are ways that I or any other interpreter of dreams has to check on the accuracy of what he is saying. Someone brings a dream to you and you interpret it. And then you say, now let's wait for the next dream. And the next dream, perhaps, corrects your interpretation. I've had that happen. Well, there you are. You have to be what your dream now is telling me is I wasn't correct the last time. And that we have to look at that last dream again. That takes courage on the part of an interpreter of dreams. And the ability to do that, to say that, reflects a greater control of the ego than the dreamer has of his ego. The highest, now, wait. Those who attain no higher than the ordinary soul, nefesh, cling to the side of uncleanliness, and when they sleep, unclean spirits come and cling to them and show them things in dreams, partly true and partly false. The things that they see in the dream that is true are those things from the archetypes. The things that are partly false are those things that they see viewed through their ego. Hence, Gentiles also see true things sometimes in their dreams, just as Jews often sometimes see truth in their dreams, so too do Gentiles. Now that's an astonishing confession for the Zohar to make, because, as Paul said, you remember St. Paul, the architect of the Christian religion? In Ephesians, he says, you Gentiles, because you're not Jews, are with hope and without God. Without God. But this says they are with God. God speaks to them in dreams as much as he speaks to Jews. So that the Gentile is as open and available to truth in dreams from God as much as the Jew is. Now that's not just me being a chauvinist. Paul says, Paul the Jew says to the Gentiles, you Gentiles, because you are not Jews, are without hope and without God. But this is telling us, well, there's an exception to that. God does speak to them, oftentimes in truth, and that is in their dreams. The problem is that the Gentile, like the Jew, has got to be able to discern what of that dream is coming from God and what of that dream is coming from his ego. Same problem as the Jew with the dream. But it is there for the Gentile. Look at what Jesus is doing in the Gnostic Gospels, not in the Scriptures, but in the Gnostic Gospels. He is awakening everyone to their true inner self. That is to say, God. They are not yet conscious of God. The Jew, on the other hand, that he speaks to, is more able to hear God that is in him than the Gentile is. It isn't that the God is not in the Gentile. It is, as much as it is in the Jew. Listen to me. God is as much in the unawakened Gentile as it is in the Jew. The problem is that for the Gentile, there is a cloak over that is preventing the Gentile from realizing it. And therefore, as the Gospels say, salvation comes from the Jews. The Jew, Jesus, removes the veil from around the true nature. The Gentile, in an almost 100% revelation. Remember, there are those in the New Testament that Jesus awakens who are Gentiles. And as it were, that's a somewhat harder job for him than those who are Jews. The Roman centurion comes to him. For example, there's an example. Jesus is speaking to a group of Jews. There's a Roman centurion there, and he says, Master, what shall I blah, blah, blah? And Jesus says, I am not your master. Only God in you is your master. The Gentile attributes godliness to man. The Jew does not. So it's a very different process of coming to understand the God in us for the Gentile than for the Jew, because the Gentile is constantly projecting it out onto people, onto a person, where the Jew does no such thing. Now listen to me. I'm not saying this makes the Jew any better or the Gentile any worse. I'm only saying it explains what Paul is saying and what they all are saying. Paul's saying to the Gentile, because you are not Jews, you are without hope and without God. Because you're projecting that inner God outside of you, onto an idol, onto a tree or a stone. So it's less available to you and to you being awakened to it than it is to the Jew who does not project it out, but who's just unconscious of it until he is made conscious. David and Yeshai, am I being clear about this? This is, well, great, thank you. The reason I ask is because if you listen carefully, this is a somewhat new teaching, or at least an elaboration and an extension on an old teaching, and it's coming from the Holy Spirit. I'm never sure if I'm doing justice to what the Holy Spirit is trying to convey through me. So I'll ask you, did I make that clear? Excuse me. I'd like you to pay particular attention to all of what I just said about the Jew and the Gentile, and the Gentile projecting God out of himself and onto a human, onto a form, either human or a stone or a tree, but projecting it out of himself. So for the Gentile, it's a question of retrieving the God, the inner God, retrieving it. For the Jew, who does no such thing as projecting it out, but who allows the ego to cover it up, the issue is uncovering it. This does not make the Jew better or worse than the Gentile, or the Gentile better or worse than the Jew. Each has a different problem because of their psychic nature. Paul says, but you Gentiles, without God, because you projected it out onto objects, the Jew, Jesus, brings it back to you. The highest are suspended in the air. The lowest mock men in their dreams. There you are. You've all experienced that. Let me give you an example that very few people consider. The question is constantly asked, and I think for good reason. Why does everything revert back to anti-Semitism if and when it starts out as being non-anti-Semitic? Because it does. Why is there, one may ask, and it's true, this absolutely unstoppable drive on the part of the Gentile to de-Judaize everything sacred? For example, one way they de-Judaize everything is Jesus is not a Jew. Come on. How many times have you heard them saying, oh no, Jesus was a fill in the blank, a German Aryan according to Hitler, a black man according to the black people, even an Asian according to one or two Asian messiahs. Anything but a Jew. The plain truth is, look at him. But there is a need to de-Judaize. That's one way. Another way is to deny the Torah, the oral Torah, and to see the Christian scriptures as totally new. They're not. To empty out anything Judaic in them, to de-Judaize the scriptures. Another way that Gentiles de-Judaize things, an example of that is replacement theology, where it is strongly believed, the Jew, you are no longer Israel. We, the Gentile, are the new Israel. That replacement theology is another example of this de-Judaizing of everything Judaic. And of course, now look at the Holocaust. People bend over backwards, not to mention the fact that it was directed primarily at exterminating the Jew. Now it's just that it was an atrocity on the world. Well, it was. No one is denying that, but that was not Hitler's intention. For Hitler, those were just casualties around the main purpose, which was to destroy the Jew. Well, that's not the way it is anymore. Look at Donald Trump commemorating Holocaust Day. No mention whatsoever of the Jews in it. And when challenged about that, said, well, we accept everybody. Now, I hope you're hearing my point. My point is, why? Why is there this? And remember, we're talking about the archetypes here in the Zohar. I submit to you that there is an archetype of anti-Semitism, just as there is a mother archetype and a father archetype and an angel archetype and a Christ archetype. There is an anti-Semitism archetype. And you have to understand what that means. That archetype is autonomous. It is self-existent. How do we know it's there? By doing what I'm doing, by just looking. That it's always there. Everything always reverts back to the anti-Semitism, because everything becomes again possessed by that archetype, that instinct. There is an instinct in the Gentile toward anti-Semitism, hidden and unconscious. And it's that archetype that when it takes large-scale possession, which is what it does, kicks the Jew out. That's what happened in Christianity. That's not just my opinion. Paul took this Jewish spiritual movement and allowed the Gentiles to come into it. Remember, read it. It's all there in the scriptures. He allowed them to come in. Little by little, they replaced the Jews and they took it over, and they literally kicked out the Jew. At the beginning, the Jew was the center of it. It was a Jewish sect. Little by little, the archetype of anti-Semitism took hold of the Gentile members of that sect and worked itself upon them. It really is funny. After the Second World War, in about the 1960s and 70s, it was very fashionable to be a Jew, especially a Jewish man. It was considered very sexy. I'll never forget, I was at a movie theater, and it was a movie about a Hasidic kid, born and raised a Chassid, and he becomes a baseball player and so forth. But anyway, behind me there was a couple on a date. And she's saying to him, I swear to God, she's saying, I think you Jews are so fascinating. Oh, she's almost saying sexy. I've always been so attracted to the Jews. That was then. That ain't so now. Because there was a temporary suspension in the archetype of anti-Semitism. But it has regained, as it always does, its foothold. These are the archetypes that are being spoken of here. When it says here in the Zohar, even the Gentile has dreams that are partly true and partly false. They are false when they are coming through the archetype of anti-Semitism. Oh God, please let them hear what I'm saying. Please, oh God, not by me, but by thee. Not my words these, but thy words these. Let them hear it as more than the chauvinistic rantings of a Jew. Please, God. It helps to explain so much and can help to heal so much, to understand it in this way. The only cure for the conflict between Arab and Jew in the Middle East is spiritual, religious, not in terms of one becoming the other's religion, but going beyond the two religions into the essence of what we're talking about here, to see the conflict in these terms, not in tribal terms or land terms. If those can be actually worked out in that way, I'm telling you, I think that is the only solution to the problem there. It is not you and I, Jew and Arab, who are fighting. It is this insidious archetype that comes up and has taken possession of the world again. The same archetype that's being spoken of here in the Zohar. They mock men in their dreams. These negative archetypes, it says, the lowest ones, mock men in their dreams. One of the most outstanding characteristics of the anti-Semitic archetype, or the anti-Semite, is his mocking of the Jew. There's a very specific way the Jew is mocked. Look at it. It's almost, for pity's sake, archetypal. There's very little creativity in the mocking of the Jew. Just look at it. But the Jew is mocked. That's the favorite weapon of the archetype of anti-Semitism working through the Gentile. The big nose, the huge nose, the grabbiness, etc. The eagerness. Now, here it is. It's talked about right here in the Zohar. That's the reason I'm talking about him now. He says the lowest grade of soul, the lowest grade of spirit in the dream, the most negative archetype in the dream, mocks men in their dreams. You notice this clearly tells us it's not the dreamer making up these mocking spirits. They exist independently of the dreamer. Now you may ask, hey, you've been talking about the archetype of anti-Semitism. There's got to be a better word for it than that, but no, you know, I've discovered it here with you. There's got to be a better word for it, but in the meantime, we'll use this word, the archetype of anti-Semitism. You can very well ask yourself, well, does it only possess the Gentile? And the answer is no. There is the phenomenon, well documented and easily seen, of the self-hating anti-Semitic Jew. So that archetype, as with all archetypes, can take possession of anyone. Why then does it sometimes take possession of the Gentile and other times, less frequently, of the Jew? Because the conflict is between the Gentile having sworn to kill the Jew. Esau swears, the father of the Gentiles, swears to kill his brother Jacob, the Jews. Now that becomes ameliorated by the meeting of Jacob and Esau at the bank of the river Jabbok. But there is still that archetypal instinct, the Esau archetype, that's a better word for it, the Esau archetype, to kill the Jew. Esau says, after Jacob has received the blessing and the birthright, soon my father will die, and then I will murder my brother Jacob. He says it right in the Torah, right in the Bible, right in the Old Testament. That's the Esau archetype. the archetype of anti-Semitism. The lowest of these spirits of the archetype mock men in their dreams. The intermediate grade tell men things partly true and partly false. They're either from the ego, which are false, or from the spirit, which are true. As for the higher grade of those who are suspended in the air, where the nefesh, the lowest soul of a man, seeks to prepare itself for the reception of the ruach, the higher, something issues from it and seeks to rise, and in so doing meets those spirits which tell it things that will happen both in the near and more distant future, and it cleaves to that upper grade until it acquires it. There you see, the negative left-hand side of God cleaves to the positive right-hand side of God until it becomes transformed by that right-hand side of God. We'll stop here. Mark my place. Tomorrow morning, we'll continue. In the meantime, let me end this broadcast as I've been ending every broadcast. And I will continue ending these broadcasts for the next year by reciting the Kaddish, the prayer for the dead, the ritual prayer for the dead, in honor of the departed soul of our beloved friend and fellow Kohen, and Tzaddik, Leonard Cohen. Yiskadal v'yiskadash me rabo, Balmo divo chirusei v'yamlich machusei, V'chayachon v'yomechon v'chayed d'chol beis Yisrael, Bagala ovizman koye v'imru amen. Yehesh me rabo mevarach le'elamo me'omaya, Yisparach v'yishtabach v'yispa'ar v'yisazman, v'yisnasei v'yisadar v'yisadei v'yisalal, Shmei d'kutro b'richu, Le'elam mincha b'irachasa v'shirasa teshvachasa, V'nechamasa dameran balmo v'imru amen. Yehi shlomo rabba min shemaya, v'chayinu aleinu v'yakol Yisrael v'imru amen. Osei shalom v'imamov, hu ya'asei shalom, aleinu v'yakol Yisrael v'imru amen. The broadcast is over. Go in peace. Shalom. Amen.
That ends the broadcast, Yishai. But now, of course, Tommy, welcome. Let me unred you. Now, let me ask, any of you gentlemen have any comments or questions or observations? Just raise your hand. Yishai, go ahead. David and Tommy, if you do, raise your hand. David, go right ahead. Oh, you do? All right, go ahead. Go ahead, Tommy. I see that's right. You can't raise your hand. Type to 1. Good. Go ahead, Tommy. Tommy, thank you so much for raising consciousness of the archetype of anti-Semitism. You're welcome. In these trying and rather horrifying times, my heart is with you and the Jewish people in the struggle against hate and bigotry. Thank you. But it's a struggle, not just the Jewish people, but it's a problem for everybody. The problem is for the Gentile that they are possessed by this evil, dark archetype. And the problem for the Jew is that it's being expressed at them. So it's for everybody. Thank you, Tommy. Thank you. I mean, look at everything in the Trump campaign. There is clearly this growing possession of them by the archetype of Esau, the anti-Semitic archetype. Clearly. I mean, clearly the reason Trump did not want to mention the Jews at all on Holocaust Day is he did not want to offend his anti-Semitic white nationalist followers. You see? Who are totally possessed by the archetype. Thank you, Tommy. Great comment. Thank you so much. Yishai, go ahead. David, go ahead. And I'm not just fighting for the Jew here. No. Don't. Let me back up. My reason for pointing this out is not for the sake of the Jew, but for the sake of the Jew and the Gentile. I'm pointing it out for the same reason Paul pointed it out, so that Jew and Gentile may become one single new man, consecrated to God. So there is no longer Jew, there is no longer Gentile, but only a single new man in each of us. So it's not for the Jew that I'm doing this, only. You have to be clear about that. It's for the reunion of God, for the reconciliation of God. There is the left-hand side of God, the Gentile, and the right-hand side of God, the Jew. And they are separated from each other. And the left-hand side of God is antagonistic to the right-hand side. It's just true. My point is to reconcile those two sides. One massive way of reconciling them is by this archetype of Esau, the anti-Semitic archetype. Another is the difference between male and female. So my work is not on behalf of the Jew. That would be very chauvinistic and typical. My work is on behalf of God. To reconcile God. There's a part of God that hates the Jews, and there is a part of God that loves the Jews. Clearly. I mean, God keeps threatening to destroy all the Jews. He says to Moses, I'm going to kill them all and start all over with you. Moses talks him out of it. Yet there are times when he says, you are my chosen people. That conflict in the mind of God is being played out in the conflict between Jew and Gentile in this world. And if we can reconcile inwardly that conflict in the world, it will reconcile it in God. As below, so above. Thank you, Tommy. Great comment. David, the lowest grade of soul in the dream mocks men in their dreams. The anti-Semitism that we see manifesting itself in modern times seems to be that salient characteristic of the nefesh, the animal soul, and is an anti-Semitic archetype. Esau passing down his hatred through his Ishmaelite wife, yes. We see it in the effort to deceive, that de-Judaizing of Christianity, those things like the Christian identity movement, which tries to claim Germano-Celtic origin to Christianity and not Jewish. My God. Yes, absolutely. To disprove those words that admonish us that salvation comes through the Jews. Ha! You got it, man. I mean, it's very frustrating for anyone to conceive of. Imagine how frustrating it is for a Jew. It's kind of, what? What are you saying? It's exactly what Trump does with everything. If you see a field of people empty of anybody, he'll say it was full of people. I mean, what do you do with that? That's a challenge to reality. Thank you, David. Thank you. Thank you, Tommy. Yishai, go ahead. Oh, hang on. I think you... Here we go. Yishai. Very powerful broadcast. Jew and Gentile are spoken to by God in dreams, as much as each other at the middle grade, with some falsity from the ego and anti-Semitic archetype of Esau, and some truth from the other archetype. Yes, absolutely. All by way of reunifying God, by reunifying Jacob and Esau. within one's own person. Bravo. That's marvelous. Absolutely, Yishai. There you go. Have you been recording these comments by any chance? Good. Include them. Include them even after I say it is concluded, Shalom and Amen. Include them, because great comments. Great comments. All right.